Hello and welcome to Using Constructed Response Questions to Foster Student Thinking, Writing, and Test-Taking Skills. The second of 3 webcasts in the series Fostering Student Success on the OAT Reading, Grades 5 through 7 Reading and Writing Informational Text. This series is designed to support grades 5 through 7 English language arts and reading teachers who want to enhance their instruction and improve student performance in the classroom and on the OAT. My name is Sheila Cannellberry, Reading Content Specialist for the Ohio Resource Center for Mathematics, Science, and Reading. Today, we will be discussing some of the challenges our students face when informational text intersects with constructed response type questions, such as those found on the Ohio Achievement Test and often on classroom assessments. We'll suggest ways to connect key test-taking skills with different types of constructed response questions. We'll also touch upon infusing test-taking and constructed response writing strategies into informational text instruction to support student achievement. You can join our discussion by submitting your email questions about today's topic. Do so early and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the live program. You'll also find support materials, including a webcast handout, which you may find helpful in viewing today's program. Now, let's meet our panelists for today's webcast. Elizabeth Bridges is an English language arts consultant with the Ohio Department of Education and has been serving education at the K-12 and university level for over 30 years. Eileen Diamond has been a teacher in grades 5 through 8 for about 20 years in Cincinnati. Most notably, she received the Cincinnatus Association Distinguished Teacher Award in 2007. And Linda Gore is a literacy support teacher for grades 6 through 8 in the Olentangy Local School District. She has been a Siri instructor and has taught content reading classes for the University of Dayton. Elizabeth, Eileen, and Linda, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
Elizabeth, can you start us off today with an overview of the Ohio Achievement Test for Reading and tell us what types of informational text and constructed response questions students might see on that test?
Certainly, Sheila. Our texts come from a variety of resources. The first example that you're going to see on your screen is an example from the grade 5 OAT, and it came from a National Geographic publication. The second example, from grade 7, is from a magazine called Calliope. We also pull resources from authors like Seymour Simon, David Macaulay, Jean Craighead George, and a variety of others. We use news articles, how-to books, cookbooks, texts that students see every day. About the constructed response questions, teachers know that those constructed response questions are either 2 or 4 points. But it's important to know that the points don't reflect the number of tasks that are being assessed. This slide shows some of that difference. This first example asks for explanation and support. But the second example asks for a summary using subheadings to organize that summary. There are 5 subheadings, but the constructed response question is only worth 4 points, so the task is not equal to the number of points. The language of the benchmark cue the types of questions that students are asked on the achievement tests. For example, in the Reading Process Standard, grade band 4 through 7, benchmark B, students are asked to do several things: summarize, predict, and compare information. In this example, students are asked to understand figurative language, took some flying leaps, make an explanation of that language, and then provide support for that from the selection that they've read. In this last example, Sheila, students are asked to look at 2 pieces of text. We call them paired passages. These are about frog jumping. And the students are asked to synthesize information from both of those selections in order to explain something. It's important to remember that the skills that students are asked to perform on the Ohio Achievement Tests are the same kinds of reading skills that they will be asked to use in the workplace and at the college level.
Elizabeth, one of the benchmarks that our students have had the most difficulty with seems to be determining an author's viewpoint or opinion about something. We learned when we examined the data from our school that across all 3 grade levels, 6, 7, and 8, this was difficult for students. Well, we know that part of it is determining what's relevant information. I think we have a passage about Ella Fitzgerald that was used on the test in which the author's opinion of Ella Fitzgerald is highly complimentary. The task, though, asks the students to determine what the author's viewpoint is and then support that. And we found that if the students go back to the text, there's a challenge right there, they can find quite a bit of information in the first and second paragraphs there to support their viewpoint or opinion. But this is a skill that we definitely need to teach them to go back. Even this highlighting strategy is a great strategy in the classroom.
Elizabeth, you referred to the language of the benchmarks when you were just telling us about what students might be asked to do on the test. So which specific ELA benchmarks are connected to those informational text questions?
The 3 standards, acquisition of vocabulary, reading process, and reading applications, informational text, are those that are addressed when talking about constructed response questions from informational passages. In each of those, there are a series of benchmarks, and all of them are covered on the Ohio Achievement Tests, with the exception of one set. And those are the benchmarks in reading process that deal with self-monitoring strategies. Self-monitoring is a skill that students can be assessed on by the classroom teacher and is not something that can be done in the class on the achievement tests.
Well, Linda, what test-taking skills are required by all of these different types of constructed response items Elizabeth's been telling us about?
Well, I like to use the QAR paradigm when I talk with kids about the different types of questions on the test. QAR stands for question-answer relationships, and there are basically 4 types of relationships that we teach kids about, although really only the first 3 are represented on the achievement test. The first one would be the right there questions, where students can look directly in the text and find the answer. Unfortunately, many more of the questions are of the next 2 types. The next one would be think and search, where students have to look at widely separated parts of the text, or perhaps at text and some kind of a visual, and then pull that information together to answer the question. And then the most difficult probably for students is the author and me type, where students really need to infer or draw a conclusion by taking relevant information from the text and adding that to their own background knowledge or prior knowledge. So I think you can see it takes a lot of direct instruction about these different types of questions in order for students to feel comfortable with that. We have an example of a question that was on the 6th grade test in May 2007, and students were asked to respond to a question about an article, The French 500, about the original settlers of Gallipolis. In some ways, the French immigrants had to adapt to life in the United States. In other ways, they brought change to their new home. Provide 2 examples of how they adapted and 2 examples of how they brought change. So even though this question doesn't directly use the words compare and contrast, we need to make kids familiar with those signal words such as in some ways, in other ways, and let them know that that is the task they're being asked to do on a question like this. We also need to let them know this is one of those think and search questions where they're going to have to look at many different places in the text in order to answer this completely.
And can you give us an example of what the actual instruction for this would look like in a classroom?
Sure, that's my job. I go into 6th grade classrooms and I teach lessons on text structures, for example, so they understand how an author of nonfiction organizes his information. I have a chart that has the 4 most commonly used text structures, at least at 6th grade level. And then we also look at some common graphic organizers. If you were reading that type of information, you might want to take notes with a Venn diagram or a T-chart based on what type of text it is. Also, we look at signal words that indicate that you are reading that type of text. The author does give you some clues along the way. I then leave a big chart with the teacher so that students can add to their signal word list, add other types of graphic organizers as they go about reading the nonfiction in their classrooms. As for the types of questions, right before Christmas I worked in an 8th grade science class where the teacher and I were trying to help kids recognize these different levels of questions, and we used the Bloom's taxonomy flip charts. Maybe you've seen these. They're really nice because it tells some of the common verbs that are used at each level, all the way from lower level questions up to the more difficult ones that kids will encounter on the test. It also has many of the common question stems that are used to start that type of question. So we went through the flip chart, and then I asked the kids some questions about the rock cycle, was what they were studying. And they had to indicate with a thumbs up if it was a higher level question, thumbs down if it was a lower level right there type, or thumbs horizontally if they weren't sure what kind of question it was. So we modeled the types of questions first, then the kids got together in their rock groups, and they had to create a question at each one of those 4 levels of right there all the way up to on my own opinion about it. I can guarantee, though, because I'm working with 6th graders doing a similar activity right now, it is an ongoing process. It's not a one-shot lesson. It's something that you really have to attack all year long so they understand questions come in different levels.
Right. So, Linda, you're saying that when students know the demands of the different levels of questions and they begin to understand that you don't approach every question the same way, right, this can really help them develop an appropriate response.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, Eileen, you have taught many grade levels during your career. Given that students do struggle so much with those constructed response items, how do you think we can best support them in the classroom?
Well, Sheila, I think that the greatest job we have as teachers is to help build their confidence as readers and writers by giving them a multitude of opportunities to practice writing, thinking, and talking about extended response answers, and about giving them a variety of materials to interact with so that they feel comfortable as time goes on. And we're going to watch a video of an Ohio teacher working with her students on an informational piece about the Loch Ness Monster. Again, right away, that's, ooh, kids might be interested in that. As you watch this clip, I'd like to encourage you to look for ways to see that the teacher is using to focus her students on specific strategies. So let's go ahead and roll the tape.
Real. Okay. So thinking about the predictions that you've made using our terms that we have found in the selection, thinking about the facts that you've gathered through our reading so far. Okay. What could we categorize as far as information goes that it could possibly be real? Okay, so look back at your selection. You've got it color-coded. Is there something that you could identify that we should put on the, this is real, this could be real? Can we give you a second to look back, or two, look back at it? Make a decision whether you're going to volunteer or not to put that information up on our graphic organizer. What might you use to help make a decision if it's true?
Wow. Sheila, there is a lot of powerful information going on there. And I'd like to encourage the viewers to watch the entire video at a later time to see how the teacher develops the entire lesson, because it looks like there's a lot of great things going on there, Sheila, but we want you readers to, or listeners, to stay with us right now.
Okay, that's right. Now let's go a little deeper. What are some of the common errors that students tend to make when they're answering constructed response questions? Elizabeth, what do you see?
Well, I see a lot of things, but some of the most common are incomplete answers. Students tend not to read the full question. If they read the first sentence, they'll stop and just answer that part of the question and not know that there's a second piece that they need to go back and attend to. Another error that I see is not understanding the test-taking language. For example, they don't understand what it means to explain or to summarize, infer, or predict. And those are critical skills for young people. On the slide that you're seeing now, it's a multiple task item. And it's asking students to evaluate a haiku based on information in a passage they've already read. They are then supposed to provide information that talks about how the haiku follows rules and how the haiku breaks the rules. In answering that question, students really need to be able to either restate or label their answers. In that way, they're going to be sure that they're answering all parts. If they restate, it will sound like one of the ways they follow the rules is, or the ways that they break the rules are. And if they label, they simply write follow rules, break rules. But they've organized themselves in such a way that they're answering the question completely. Some of the benchmarks that we see students have the most difficulty with are those in informational texts that deal with cause and effect, fact and opinion, and understanding and evaluating an author's viewpoint or argument. When it comes to reading process, the one that we repeatedly see again and again that they have difficulty with are those that deal with inferring information.
I'd like to piggyback on what Elizabeth was just saying about the language of the test, too. I think especially with words like infer, we assume that when the student attacks that prompt on the test, he's going to understand what that word means. One of my 6th grade teachers did kind of a little pre-test assessment on some of the more common vocabulary, some of these common verbs on the test, and we were both surprised to see that the kids really did not understand what some of these verbs meant. So I think sometimes it's not a case of the student not wanting to answer it or not maybe understanding what he's asked to do. He just doesn't understand that verb, which is kind of at the core. We found a website on the internet, one of many that are out there, many commercial websites, Vocabulary A through Z, where you can generate a bank of words such as analyze, persuade, infer, and then you can create activities to do that, although we teachers can do this on our own too. We made a set of concentration cards where the student could match the definition with the verb that was troublesome. I think one of the more powerful strategies, though, is the 4-block vocabulary sheet where you put the word infer, you put a dictionary definition, and then the student draws some kind of a visual that will be meaningful to him. For example, maybe his head thinking plus a book to know you have to add clues from both together. And then finally, he uses that verb in a sentence that's meaningful to him. But again, it takes many exposures to this vocabulary for kids to understand what these terms mean. We can't just automatically assume that they know what they are.
Yes. Understanding the test vocabulary is so important. I want to point out that in the webcast materials, there's a short article from ORC's ADLIT website about helping students fully respond to test questions. It was written by 5th grade teacher Shannon Bumgarner. In addition to helping her students understand the performance verbs, she describes how she teaches them to recognize what she calls neon words and phrases. These are the terms that students often overlook, but that can really affect how they comprehend a question. Phrases such as at the beginning or the word not, for instance. Let's go ahead now and share some more effective instructional strategies for helping students succeed on those constructed response questions.
Okay. Sheila, something that I have used in the past that I have found to be very successful is using newspapers. Newspapers in the classroom with students. And this allows me to tap into a lot of strategic lessons that might be able to help them, mini lessons. And there are many items that can be used, again, to match the needs of your particular students in the classroom. But some of the things that I've done many lessons on with the newspaper include paraphrasing, giving students an opportunity to look at an article and then to paraphrase it, or also identifying facts and opinion, which seems like a very simple task. but using real materials, the newspaper allows them to dive into it and perhaps also to have something they're interested in reading about. I also have used the newspaper to do lessons on context clues for finding some unknown words and kind of diving back into the text. And also a great resource in the newspaper are the letters to the editor and the editorial pages. Very interesting, even to talk about hyperbole, getting students interested in both fiction and nonfiction and what's going on with that. But as teachers, it's very important that we are strategic with our mini lessons. We know our students. We need to be able to, again, be continuously kid watching our students and to pick many lessons that will help our students to be, to be the best readers and the most strategic readers, so they'll be very successful as, they encounter materials.
One of the strategies that our teachers like, Sheila, is from Kelly Gallagher's book, Teaching Adolescent Writers. It's a wonderful book. He has a strategy called ABCD, a very simple way of A, attacking the prompt, of B, brainstorming, of C, choosing the order of the response, and finally D, of detecting errors before you turn your work in. I was asked by one of our 7th grade social studies teachers to come into her classroom and help her model this technique with her kids. She was comparing ancient Egyptian and ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. So we did kind of a teacher model of how we would attack the prompt, what the verbs meant, what our task was going to be. Then we asked the kids to join with us to brainstorm some of the possible responses, and we had to get a second transparency out. They brainstormed so many ideas. We then showed them how we would choose the most relevant details and the order in which we would put these in our response, and then of course D, we checked it for any errors before we turned it in. She later had the kids use that same template, the ABCD format, for her unit test. She had a constructed response item on there, and she said she got the best answers ever with using this technique. So it was very powerful for the 7th graders.
Wow. That sounds like a great strategy. Yeah. Another strategy that I've used even with younger students, kids a lot of times love to have acronyms. Oh, yeah. And this is an acronym of BOSS. They're the boss. They're the person in charge of that particular question. And BOSS stands for B is for borrowing from the question, looking at the question specifically. O is outlining the answer in the margin so they know exactly what the test question is asking. S, support the answer by looking back at the selection. And the final S, survey the answer to make sure it is clear and complete. But as a teacher, it's important not to just throw out the strategy and say, starting tomorrow, we are going to be in charge. We are going to do the BOSS strategy. That is not the way that I have found to be effective with strategies, but instead, take time, and there's a four-way process that I go through. Number one, I like to first talk about the strategy. I would talk about the BOSS strategy or another strategy and say what it is, how I would use it, and again, why it's something that I find it to be valuable. I also have time to model the strategy specifically with a piece of nonfiction. This is how I used it, and give kids time to talk and to think and ask questions right there when I'm modeling it. And then the third step, which is I think the most important step, is giving kids a time to experiment, giving kids a time to practice the strategy, but in a non-threatening way. Right. With material that they feel comfortable about, with a partner, maybe with a few kids together, working on the strategy. And as they're doing that, as a teacher, walking around being a kid watcher, keeping little notes, being a detective. What's working? What's not working? Who has got it or who needs to go back? But then after a certain length of time, again, the teacher being the person who knows her students the best, going on to giving some independent practice. But it's not over at that. The independent practice lets me know as a teacher whether they got it or what I need to go back. It is not necessarily a process that is very recursive. You never know, and again, with students, we have to know our students and which students got it and which students didn't. But that's part of the fun of teaching. There are checklists in the supporting resource section at the webcast that would give you an opportunity to look at some of the papers I've developed, some kid watching, and also something that I've used with newspapers in my classroom. So I hope you find them valuable.
Oh, those are all really good ideas, and we're just gathering more and more ideas for strategies we can use in the classroom, the newspapers, the ABCD, the BOSS, the mini lessons. How about using released items in the practice test? How do you feel about that? What do you think?
I think it is important that students learn just about the genre of testing. And, you know, those are great items. The ones that are released are really going to help the kids know what this test looks like, what kind of passages they might encounter. Again, the vocabulary of the released items will help them, and then we can use them for that gradual release of responsibility so that we can model how we would respond to that question, which evidence we would pull to support our opinion, and then have the kids practice too. I might do a think aloud on how I'm doing my weeding through details, and then ask a student to do a think aloud too. Then they can always compare their sample answer with the answer that ODE releases and see how close they got to a good answer for that. I've also used these released short items and their responses to play kind of a human checkerboard game. I did this with my staff a couple years ago at a professional day, where we had a floor, black and white tiled, and we had divided teachers into two teams. You would give them a card that had a released item and the answer on it. And I like this because it makes it low risk, so even your at-risk kids can do this. They don't have to come up with the answer, they just have to read what's on the card. The task is then the team decides whether that response would have been worth 2 points, no points, 1 point, and if the team is correct, then the player gets to advance across the checkerboard. So I don't think all this test practice has to be just work. It can be fun too. Yeah.
Well, that really does sound like fun. And we know that the released items and the practice tests are available online from the Ohio Department of Education. And Elizabeth, can you tell us, are there other materials that we should be looking at to
Absolutely.
help with?
Absolutely. If you go to ODE's homepage, which is now at www.education.ohio.gov, you will see on that top taskbar a button that says testing. If teachers click on that button, they will get to a site called Resources for the OAT. And in that particular location, they will find a PDF about constructed response questions, which might be helpful for them as they're beginning to develop some in their classroom for students to do. A second place that teachers can look is under the section called Families. And at the very bottom of that section is a button called Statewide Testing Site. And that will take you to what we call a success site. On the success website, teachers can actually see student papers that have been scored. And that's very helpful for them to be able to see the range of what a 4 looks like, or how this student scored a 1, or that student scored a 2, or why this just missed for some reason. Another thing that's really useful at that site is that teachers can practice scoring so that they can see how well their scoring aligns or meshes with the scores that have been given on the OAT.
Okay, and let's not forget that the ODE released items may also be accessed on the ORC website. You can get them by searching for Ohio Achievement Test, and you can limit your results to bring up just the constructed response items. And I'd like to point out that you can also find a folder containing all of the released items and all the passages that we've used in today's webcast in one of the mini collections that we've included with the webcast materials. And now we do have some email questions from our viewers. We asked them to do that, and we'll take a few of those. Our time has gone so quickly. I think this first one, Elizabeth, I think this first one is for you.
Okay.
Because they ask a question. Why aren't all the questions released?
It's a good question. There are a couple of reasons why all test questions aren't released. One of them is because that particular passage or selection may be used again. So in 2, 3, maybe 4 years, that may repeat. And that will not be released until it has been seen twice. Another reason that questions may not be appearing on the website is because they were originally field test questions, those that were embedded within the test, that were just being just there to see whether or not they actually meet the benchmark, indicator, and standard. If the data shows that that's a poor question, it never gets on an operational test, and as a result, it never gets released.
Okay, thank you. That actually covered a couple of the questions that have come in.
Good.
And here's another one. It's one that I've heard many, many times, and it is, what can I do to discourage my students from skipping constructed response questions?
Wow. Well, Sheila, I'll go into that one because that's partly what I've been talking about, okay? We have to build the confidence in our kids. That's our job. And we are the ones that have to allow them to have some strategies that are right there, that they feel comfortable doing, that they know how to do it. So they will at least take the risk of, at least attempting that because they know that they have it. So a big part of our job is to build their confidence. And so as they become more confident, I'm confident. It's January. They're gonna be fine.
I'll add to that, Eileen. I think I agree with you. It does have to be done on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis. We can't wait till right before the test to do test practice. I think if we start at the beginning of the year with relatively low-risk tasks, maybe just an exit ticket or a quick write on tell me 2 characteristics of the main character of our novel, and then gradually throughout the year kind of up the ante. Maybe near the end of the year it looks more like a constructed response type question with compare and contrast 2 characteristics of our main character in the novel to a character you've seen in a favorite movie or television show, and cite 2 pieces of evidence from the texts that support that. So that way we really are getting them closer and closer to the test so that when test time comes, they feel comfortable with that. Again, it's not a one-shot deal. This has to be done throughout the year. Activities, as you mentioned, like the write, pair, and share, where a student writes an answer, the teacher circulates while pairs are sharing their answers, and then she can get a little feedback about whether her instruction was on the mark or not. So I think there are lots of ways we can incorporate this, Sheila, into daily, weekly, monthly activities.
We have to. That's right. Thank you. Here's another one. When answering constructed response questions, are there key words that students should use in their answers? We have been told that if a student uses the words "in conclusion" at the end of the answer to their extended response question, then they will receive a better score. True? Not true?
Not true. Not true. Those kinds of keywords are irrelevant, actually, if they're not attached to specific details that connect with the text or the question that's being asked. So no, there aren't specific words. The only thing that would be specific is what I talked about earlier when you label things. If the question asks you what happens first and second, and you label it first and second, those then are key words that you should see the students use. But magic words, no, there aren't any, sadly.
Okay. That answers that one. And I think we might tie this one into that answer because it specifically about the answers on those questions. Can encouraging students to bullet their responses help ensure that they answer all parts of the question? What do you think about that practice?
I think it's a good place to start, and certainly teaching students how to pull out the most important information and making sure they include that in their answer. I think the idea, though, of kind of putting that off to the side and then constructing your written answer from that. I mean, in the real world, and that's what we're preparing them for, You know, there's a place certainly for bulleted lists, but when we need something a little more complete, you know, we want students to be able to do that too. So I think the bullets are a good way to start, but I always like to see them write something a little more complete than that.
Linda, I do want to add, though, that this is a reading test, and it's not a test of grammar or writing. So if the sentence is incomplete, or if the sentence isn't grammatically correct, but all of the information is there, the student gets the point. We do not take points off for mechanics or grammar unless for some reason it interferes drastically with the meaning of their sentence.
That's important for people to know, too.
Right.
Linda, I have a couple of questions about some of the activities you described. One, are the directions for the released item checkerboard activity on the ORC website? If not, how can I get them? I want to point out that that one isn't a released item, but it's something that you do use released items in it. So that, yeah, I misread it.
No, they're not at this point on there, but we can certainly put those on there. You know, because I know how it is. You watch these, and then 2 days later you go, what was that activity? So sure, we can do that. I mean, it's a typical checkerboard type game, but I'd be glad to draw up directions for that.
All right, put that on your to-do list.
Okay, I will.
And then one more for you, Linda. What model did you use to create the lesson on questioning strategies for students, and how was this lesson developed? And as far as the QAR goes, I know there's that ORC resource.
Right. We have, I think, some resources in the packet here about QAR, and there's certainly, if you do a search on that, there's a lot of research about QAR. And then just in analyzing the test, realizing that really those first 3 types are the key types of question to focus on. So much of what I do in classrooms, including this, really arises from teacher needs. These 6th graders that I'm working with now, you know, it became evident they did not understand that question 1 that they're generating was a totally different level, or should be, from number 6. So some of this just arises from student and teacher need, I would say. The other thing that sticks in my mind too, with the 8th graders, when we did the rock cycle lesson and they generated questions, I had a group of 8th graders come down and find me a little bit later, and they said, we see compare and contrast up in this level, and it's also down here. How can those same verbs be in 2 different levels? So you really do have to explain to kids that it's the demand of the, you know, comparing dogs to cats can be pretty low level, but comparing 2 totally different works, for example, a movie and a novel, and traits of characters within those, or examining someone's motive or the cause for an event, that requires higher level thinking, so it's on a different level. So,
well, thank you. And then we do have some questioning resources in one of the many collections that accompany the webcast. And I'm going to close with this one. I'll throw this one out for our last question as our time draws to a close here. And the writer is saying that there's been an indication that Think Alouds can benefit all teachers at all grade levels, but the teachers, the individuals working with at the upper grades seem unwilling to try it. Have you had any success with encouraging teachers to use Think Aloud? I mean, we hear that it is such a valuable strategy to use.
Well, I would suggest whoever wrote that to share the practice with others. And because I think once teachers see that it's something that engages students and, you know, can change the classroom, then I think that that's something that will be adopted. But until they see it, you know, they may think it's primary.
And I tell my teachers, you know, if they feel uncomfortable with that, like it's too babyish, try taking something that they don't understand, you know, the tax code or the directions that they just got with the new electronics, and think aloud with that. Don't do it with a piece of text that you understand, because then it is going to seem artificial. But take something that you truly do not understand and talk your way through that and what kind of thinking you are doing. Then it becomes very genuine, even at upper levels.
It's a real eye-opener when you do it for yourself, I think, isn't it? It really is. Well, all good questions, and I wish we had time to answer more. And I think they really reflect just how important this topic is. But before we end our webcast today, I would like to ask each of our panelists to share one more instructional practice or tip that teachers can use to help students build their confidence and build their competence with constructed response questions. So, Elizabeth, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the thing that I'd like to leave with teachers is for them to use the language of the benchmark standards and indicators in their everyday practice. If teachers are using words like predict, synthesize, and hypothesize all the time, they become a part of the student's natural language. And it's important then to encourage them to use those words. If you hear your students saying, I like this book better than that one, encourage them to change that language so that it says, when I compare these two books, that way that becomes so entrenched in who they are that when they see it on the OAT, it won't throw them. I think that the more they use the language, the easier the kinds of constructed response questions they come in contact with will be for them.
Right, thank you. Eileen, anything to add?
Well, Sheila, I think the biggest thing is taking time every day to practice and getting kids to talk and getting them to interact with text and getting them to have an opportunity to experiment. And then that way, as they do that, they will gain their confidence. But giving them, again, an opportunity to actually interact with a variety of text.
Just incorporating
it in the everyday lessons.
So important. Right.
So, Linda, what are your final thoughts?
Well, there's so many great books out there right now that can be resources to us as teachers. One of them that I like is Test Talk. And I'd like to quote page 136 in this book, which I thought was really cute. They use part of Dr. Seuss's Hooray for Diff'n'Doofer Day book to reassure their students that they do know how to answer constructed response and other types of questions. So if I may read a little. Miss Bonkers rose. Don't fret, she said. You've learned the things you need to pass that test and many more. I'm certain you'll succeed. We've taught you that the earth is round, that red and white make pink, and something else that matters more. We've taught you how to think. If kids see that they have had a lot of practice over the year with these reading test strategies, with the vocabulary of the test, with what released items, sample answers might look like, then I think we do make them much more comfortable with the test and with the demands of the achievement test.
That's a great message. And this has been a really engaging discussion. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Eileen, and Linda, for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for joining us.
We will agree that we all seem to feel that teachers should play an active role in building familiarity and integrating frequent practice with constructed responses into their instruction. Not as something that is an add-on, but as a means of sound test preparation that also addresses key English language arts standards and benchmarks. Today, we've considered some of the specific challenges students have when responding to constructed response informational text questions. We've discussed some test taking and instructional strategies to help students think, read, and write more critically in preparation for the OAT and other types of assessments and assignments that require constructed response writing. And we certainly hope you'll continue this conversation with your colleagues. To get you started, there are some post-viewing suggestions included in the webcast handout. Please take advantage of all the supporting materials found on Fostering Student Success on the OAT Reading homepage at www.ohioRC.org/for/ELA/webcast/OAT. And if you would like to learn more about these topics, please contact ORC at web@ohioRC.org. We would be happy to work collaboratively with you to plan building or district-wide professional development programs. For the Ohio Resource Center, I'm Sheila Cannelberry, wishing you success with all of your instructional strategies in reading.